Good morning. It's good to see everyone. Thanks for coming on such a beautiful day. Beaver Meadow Farms here on the Little River Valley in the Comox Valley. The farm was started by my grandparents way back in the 1930s, and it was a beef and vegetable farm. My father and mother and parents operated the farm through the 1950s and 1960s and 70s, and in the 1980s myself and my brother Doug and my brother Philip have operated the farm since then. And over the years we've done many things on this farm, from vegetables and beef, dairy cattle, and today we're doing organic grass-fed beef, and we've been doing that for several decades. And this is a general vista of the meadows. When my grandparents came here, this was a natural meadows, and the meadows were grazed by elk and local deer. We had populations of wolves and cougars and bears that controlled the natural populations of ruminants. And so over the decades, our family has more or less just carried on copying the natural processes that were here when our family arrived. And today the cattle have largely replaced the elk, and we still have a few wolves, a few cougars, and a few bears. Even though we are surrounded by urban development, we have maintained our natural habitat on about 700 acres of the Little River Valley here. And we'll go down and see the cattle grazing during the day, and we'll explain a lot of the natural processes that are occurring on the farm that we have learned to appreciate and utilize in our farming methods. All our farm is basically under perennial forage production or forest production, and on our farm we have a large amount of freshwater habitat that is the freshwater home for coho salmon, chum salmon, and sea-run cutthroat trout. And we have protected about 8 miles of river habitat on our farm and included it in our farming practices. So probably what we'll do now is just head on down the road to the cattle. So as I was explaining, we graze all the farm with our cattle and other ruminants, and what we do is enhance the water cycle. And the water cycle is what provides the productivity on the planet Earth, it cools the planet, and it feeds all the microbiological life in the soil, as well as the grazing animals above the soil. So right here is what's known as the Little River. It's one of the most productive salmon streams on the east coast of Vancouver Island on a per habitat basis, or per square meter habitat basis. And this is a spawning channel for coho salmon. And what we have done is protected this natural biodiversity by fencing off all the habitat around the river and allowing a lot of natural vegetation to grow around the edges. And it provides an interface between forest and grassland, which is a very diverse part of any ecosystem. And so there's a large number of fish that stay in the freshwater habitat all summer long, and this habitat keeps the water cool. It also provides drinking water for the cattle, and if you can see off in the distance, you can see the cattle laying down, and it's a very windy day today, but this type of habitat protects the cattle from wind and weather, and it's one of our ways of adapting to changes in climate. And more extreme weather, wind, winter, whatever, is to provide these windbreaks, these natural habitats that the elk used originally to winter. And they browse on it. It's their medicine shelf. If they got a headache, for example, they'll come and eat some willow leaves or something like that. And so they take these browse and shrubs along the edge of the fields, just like ruminants have done for millions and millions of years. And they keep themselves healthy by doing that. You can see the rose hips there. They actually graze rose hips. And we use it as medicine as well. But the cattle know how to select that at this time of year. It's an excellent source of vitamin C. And so we'll move on just a little bit into the field, and we'll see the cattle and what they're doing on a beautiful fall day here on November the 5th or 6th. And the cattle are just enjoying life outside. So this is an electric fence. It's got about 7,000 volts in it, so I don't want you stepping on it. It'll wake you up.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Now just come on through the gate here. That's where you walk out here.
Yeah.
So what you can see here is the cattle grazing out in the meadows. And our approach to farming is that we don't consider ourselves actually ranchers or cattle farmers. We're actually grass farmers or solar farmers. And our approach to holistic, regenerative, natural farming is to take the natural solar panels, which are the leaves of grass that grow in nature, and take down the free energy from the sun and convert it into sugars. And the sugars, of course, feed all the microbes in the soil and drive the fertility of the biological life. And also we harvest that energy in the plant leaves, that sugar, with energy converters or natural fiber biodigesters on 4 legs. We call them cows. And they have a rumen, and all the fiber, all the energy is converted in the rumen of the cow into a protein. And so those cattle out there are doing their job of converting energy today that the plant has intercepted and converted all summer long and is continuing to do. We've adapted to changes in climate by putting types of forage here on the soil that will catch sunlight probably at least 10 months to 11 months of the year. And that way it reduces our costs of farming, keeps the animals healthy, and provides them a source of nutrition all year round just by selecting types of plants that will grow all round. And on Vancouver Island we have that marvelous ability to grow grass pretty well year round, with a few exceptions of snow or ice occasionally. But this is our solar panels, and if you notice around the edge of the fields we have electric fences, and we call those our electric wolves. They have taken the place of the wolves that once were here and grouped the deer and elk into herds. This is a very low stress lifestyle for cattle when they're outside in the sunshine and the fresh air and eating natural meadows and pastures. The cattle are a herd-oriented society, and they feel very safe when they're in a group. And when they're in a group like that, they convert the energy by grazing the grass down quite uniformly. And if you can see, they were here about 4 days ago, and the grass has been cut off fairly even. There hasn't been too much selection of which plants they eat, and it's that even selection of the grass that allows the herd to be moved on by the electric wolves to the next paddock and the next paddock. And this grass rests for about 80 days or so, so it grows up nice and fresh, full of energy, full of protein, and the bacterial and fungi life in the soil does all its work. A lot of the residue, the top 3 or 4 inches of the grass, has been taken off, and there's 5 or 6 inches of grass left. A lot of it has been trampled into the ground here, and there's manure from the animals and urine from the animals, and that is all being incorporated into the soil. The bacteria are digesting it. The carbon has come in from the CO2 in the air. The plant roots have sequestered it by putting sugars out in the soil for the bacteria to eat. All the microbes in the soil are working, and all this is going on in the soil and feeding life on the planet and feeding life on this farm. And it's this succession of movements of ruminants or cattle or energy converters and digesters that goes on in sequence and leaves the plant life behind to rest, and they don't come back and eat it again. It's been this process that occurred over the grasslands of the world for millions and millions of the years, and that's basically what we're copying and trying to do here in the Beaver Meadows, is just keep doing that natural process, taking carbon in from the air, building humus in the soil, making all kinds of spongy mats of fungal products in the soil, and that stores the water, and the water stays in the soil and it doesn't run off, and it slowly feeds the salmon stream that we just saw there along the edge of the grasslands. So that row of trees is where the salmon are spawning. I think yesterday we counted about 50 salmon come up into the river, starting to spawn all between here and the ocean. So it's this balance of the ruminants on the grasslands, the riparian zones, the rivers, the water cycle, all that carbon coming from the atmosphere. It's this beautiful natural process that has occurred on the planet for 300 million years or more. I think the grasslands got established about 50 million years ago, and ruminants developed with the grasslands. And without each other, this all falls apart. And so our kind of attempt to do holistic regenerative farming on Beaver Meadows is to bring it all back together and to keep it going and build it for the future. I don't think you can see it right here, but there's lots of deer that graze out in the fields as well. We might see some more as we go through the farm, and we may see some raptors, eagles, or hawks that live in this grasslands. There's a lot of biodiversity that's occurring here, this type of a farming system. But you can see how the cattle are waiting. They're wondering what we're doing here. What they think we should be doing is going over there and opening the gate so they can go to their next free salad bar. And they're just quietly waiting, wondering why we're taking so long. But if you look at them, they have been selected through generations of eating grass to live on nothing but grass. That's the way nature designed these animals. And that's how we are hoping to be able to deal with any changes in climate over the next decades, is pick different types of animals that have evolved for millennia and still have the ability to live outside in natural conditions, grazing, fertilizing the soil, and establishing the grassland habitat which keeps our planet cool. And if we can do that, and other farmers around the world can regenerate the soils and the grasslands, we probably can avoid a lot of climate problems coming up in the next few hundred years. So what I think we'll do now is we'll go to another part of the farm and we'll actually watch the cattle going from one paddock to another, and show you how easy it is to let the cattle look after themselves. You want to move them to...
Well, they gotta go that way, so that I was thinking it would be better if you're over on the roadway over there, maybe.
So here's the cattle following Julie on the ATV, and she's taking them from the salad bar they had for breakfast this morning to the salad bar for their lunch. And they're a little bit excited with us talking here and that, but eventually they'll go follow her from this field to the next field. And you can see how they've eaten most of the grass off the top of the grass, and they've left quite a bit behind, which is going to feed the soil. And there's probably about 80 beef animals there that have been grass-fed all their life here on the meadows. But under the soil, there's probably 4 or 5 times the same number of pounds of actually living animals, bacteria, fungi, microbes. And so we never not feed the soil. We always leave enough grass and manure and urine that will fall down into the soil and feed the animals in the soil. There they go. They're off to lunch at a new salad bar. You can see how happy they are. And that's what's easy about managing cattle outside in nature, following their instincts to move away from where they've left their manure and where they've trampled the grass, and move off to a nice fresh piece of grassland that's been growing for about 2 or 3 months. It's rested, it's full of energy, lots of carbon in the soil. Carbon is storing water for the growing season. At the same time, the grass is letting water moisture into the atmosphere, and it goes up and makes clouds, forms rain, and cools the planet. And it's that 95% of the planet that's water vapor that actually cools the planet. And that's why this cycle of grasslands, water retention in the soil is so important. to the survival of our life on this planet. And the cattle, the ruminants, the energy collectors, digesters, they're all an integral part of the cycle. And we just kind of fit into it a little bit by letting them go from field to field. And the animals very seldom get sick or injured. They're living a low stress lifestyle. And you can see how they've put their heads down and they're eating right away. So they'll do that. They'll fill up their rumen. The bacteria in the rumen are going to digest it and convert it into energy. And they're going to drop parts of that biodigester all over the surface of the grassland or the field. And the bacteria and microbes in the manure are going to inoculate the bacterial life in the soil. And it just keeps building and enhancing the natural fertility and water cycles that occur in nature. It's very peaceful. There's nothing more peaceful than pastoral ruminants, happy and full and contented. And if you look around, you see the trees, the grass, and the mountains, and the sunlight. It makes for a very relaxing, fulfilling farming system. And if we can get all our ruminants out of the feedlots and back onto the grasslands, people will be healthier, the planet will be healthier, and our soils will be healthier. And we've been doing this regenerative style of farming here for over 60 years. And it's profitable, and it's ecologically beneficial to everybody and all life on the planet. And if consumers value this type of food and this type of farming, then they have a choice of either buying grass-fed beef and stop buying feedlot produced meat. And just by that single choice, we could restore the planet by allowing farmers to make a living producing naturally produced products from a living soil. And this is the evidence. It's possible, it's doable, it's easy. And you can see how it all fits together right here in this one picture.
I'm kind of curious, what do you do in the winter time? Like, because I'm assuming they wouldn't be out here in the winter. So what does that look like?
Okay, so the elk and the deer, before we came here, they lived here all winter long. And so we will allow the animals to stay out here as long as the grass is still growing and the climate is not too adverse for the cattle. But if you do a close-up on those cattle, you'll see how thick their fur and hair is. And they can stay out here in rain and snow. And as long as they have enough energy to digest, they are healthy and content. They will group up in a group to heat themselves at night when they lay down. And usually about around December through January and February, when the coastal climate is just rain day after day after day and the temperature goes down, then we do take them inside to the barns for about 2 to 3 months. And the other reason that we take them in is that the most valuable animals living on our farm are in the soil. And to have living soils, healthy soils, you need airspace in the soil for the microbes and the bacteria and the fungi to get oxygen. And so if this gets too much water, the cattle will trample it and compact it and get rid of the airspace in the soil. And so we don't want the grazing animals to damage the soil habitat. So probably within, depending on the weather, sometime between now and Christmas, we will take the animals off the grasslands, off the meadows, and put them in the barns, where we have stored fermented grass, silage. And they still get 100% grass, but it's been stored and pickled or fermented like sauerkraut and cabbage, and they get all the nutrients from the silage in the barn in the wintertime. And the manure that they produce in the barn, we keep and store, and then we compost it. And then later in the growing season, we will inoculate the grasslands with a small amount of compost so that the bacteria and the fungi can get a little boost of new soil creatures to grow in the soil. So it's just a continuous cycle. But in nature, when this meadow got too wet in the wintertime, the elk and deer would go up into the higher forest land where the soil was not flooded. But because I don't own enough higher forested land, I can't take the animals and put them there in the wintertime, and so we do have to put them in a barn.
Very interesting.
So these animals also are a lot smaller than conventional beef animals, and that means they're a lot lighter, and so their hooves do not compact the soil when it gets wet, and so they can stay out here and graze for a longer period of time without damaging the soil, because they're a smaller, lighter animal, and they're genetically selected to produce very well on just grass alone. They don't need grain like a lot of our adapted species have been grown to use in the last 100 years or so. So by going back to these smaller type of animals, they're closer to what evolved in nature to not damage the soils and not be heavy animals.
Is there a I guess, is there sort of like a math to how many cows you would want per, I don't know, like per area, depending on how big the area is, or is it kind of flexible in terms of...
Our approach to how many animals we carry on, say, an acre of land is the health of the soil. And so we never want those cattle coming back to this saddle bar until everything is grown up and refreshed and recovered. And so it's that time between going around the farm and coming back that determines how many animals we can carry. So we don't do it by formula, we do it by watching the health of the soil and the plants. And the climate, if it's dry or wet, also determines that length of time that we can come back and regraze the grasslands. And that depends on all those things together. You have to balance and watch them and observe them. For us, we can carry about 1 animal per acre per year after many years of doing this holistic planned grazing that regenerates the soils. That's kind of a balance for our climate in this era of the 2020, and with the climate change, the amount of rain we get, the health of our soils, and the recovery period of our grasses after they're grazed. Somebody else in a different place, they may have to wait a year before they can come back. We can come back in 60 to 80 days. And so there is no strict formula. It's all based on the health of the grasslands and the soil and how we manage it. If we were just converting from a conventional vegetable operation and there was no grass growing, it would probably take us 10 years or more to get up to the number of animals that we can carry on this farm today. So it depends on a lot of factors. It's not as easy as one thinks it is, but over time, the regenerative type of farming, the biological systems kick in and improve and get stronger every year, and the carrying capacity to produce increases higher and higher every year.
Do you ever do any sort of like soil testing on the farm, or?
I do soil testing, and I also have a microscope, and I take samples of the soil and I look in the microscope, and what I'm generally looking for is how many bacteria in a gram of soil and how many fungi and how many arthropods and soil predators I find in a gram of soil. And that tells me how healthy the soil is and what I need to do if something isn't working fine. Years and years ago we did conventional soil testing that tested the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and copper. But when you do biological farming, it doesn't really mean anything to know those numbers. My experience is none of the soils on this farm are short in nutrients, but what they are short of or can be impacted is what is the biological activity that takes those nutrients and puts them in the pasture or transfers them to the animals. And so the soil testing that I do, and I do send them away, they come back and they tell me, you know, how many nematodes, how many bacteria, how many fungi, you know, how many arthropods, how many, all these different critters in the soil. And if there seems to be something that's not quite as strong as it could be, then it gives me an idea that when I make my compost, I need to enhance the fungi, or I need to enhance the cilia, or I need to make good root-eating nematodes or something like that. And that's kind of how I balance these things.
They're not so normally running around in the fields when I go to move them. They see
Sorry.
you guys and oh, what are we doing?
Oh yeah, it's time for a little party today. Party time.
They already had a party time in the fence post over there that I was fixing.
Oh well, they got there, that's the main thing.
Yeah. Usually they're all right at the gate waiting to run through.
Yeah. Well, they're
they
movie.
had other things on their mind when they see you guys.
We don't get a chance to be movie stars very often, so.
No, might as well show off.
Show off, yeah. You can see the nice fresh green grass that they get for lunch today. And there's about 12 to 15 different types of grasses growing in there. There's selections of legumes like clovers, and there's a few herbs like plantain and chicory. So it's a well diverse grassland that gives them a very balanced nutrition. And they're plants that are adapted to grow in the wet time of the year, the cold time of the year, the dry time of the year. They're always there, covering the ground, collecting energy. And in regenerative agriculture, the worst thing you can do is have bare soil. And it's like the worst thing we can do in our society is have a bare surface that absorbs heat. This grassland reflects energy back up into the iosphere and it cools the planet. If I had bare soil, it would absorb the energy and heat the planet up. And so one of the natural benefits of grasslands is that reflection of energy to the atmosphere. Hi girls, come on. Come on girls. Come on. Come over and talk. Okay, so here we have another example of using a different type of ruminant to capture solar energy and convert it into milk. These are Asian water buffalo, and Vancouver Island has a few herds of Asian water buffalo. They originate somewhere in Asia, India, the subcontinent, and over the centuries they migrated through to Romania and Italy and places like that. This herd came to Canada from Romania a few decades ago. Water buffalo are a different species than our regular cattle we have, but they're extremely resilient and very hardy and very adaptive. And one of the issues we have with climate change is the heat in the summertime. And water buffalo have a genetic resistance to heat stress. And so in the hot summers, they don't care really how hot it is. And surprisingly, they don't mind the cool winters here on Vancouver Island. And we have them here as a source of milk. We have a cheese factory, and we make about 20 different kinds of cheese, and about 8 or 9 of our cheeses are made from water buffalo milk. And we make things like mozzarella di bufala, paneer, water buffalo brie, water buffalo feta, and it's all naturally produced from grass. They don't get any food or anything. They are very healthy animals. They live a long time, and they don't have problems like normal milk cows have of things like mastitis, so they don't require treatment with penicillin or antibiotics or things like that. They're a very hardy, natural species that has evolved on this planet in symbiosis with man. In Asia, they live with farmers in their farmhouses. They pull carts, they plow rice fields, they provide meat, protein, milk, and we're finding that they're very well adapted to here at Vancouver Island, and so the water buffalo industry is starting to grow on Vancouver Island. They're very, very domesticated. When they decide to come over, you can just pet them like pussycats. You scratch their ears, and they just love being around people once they get to know you. So it's one of those strategies that we've looked at, and the other thing about water buffalo, they provide a different type of milk than normal cow's milk, and it's naturally homogenized. It's very high in protein and fat, and it has different casein and different lactose that is very digestible, that a lot of people from Asian cultures can't digest regular cow's milk. They can digest water buffalo and not feel upset stomachs and things like that. So we have a growing demand for a lot of customers that will not eat regular dairy products, can eat water buffalo cheese. It's another interesting thing. These are cows and heifers that are due to calve and then go to be milked, to then have the milk be made into yogurt and cheese and various things. Come on, girls, come and have a talk. You may have to walk up to them. The wind dies down a bit here.
Yeah. Is there any, do they come with any challenges, or are they pretty much...
The biggest adaptation is the mind of the farmer that has to learn to manage them. They can be a little bit stubborn, and if they don't want to go into a milking parlor to be milked, or they don't like something, they just kind of refuse to go, and you have to be very gentle and earn their trust and not be in a hurry. So that's one thing. They have a different temperament, and you have to learn to adjust to that temperament. When it comes to breeding them, they don't show the same signs of being ready for breeding. and so it's a little harder to breed them than a regular beef animal or a dairy animal. So you have to learn that skill of how to manage that. But other than that, most people that are familiar with managing animals would adapt to learning how to manage water buffalo.
Awesome.
They're very long-lived. That's another thing. Like, they'll produce for 10 or 15 years, and they produce their calves with very little need of assistance. So they look after themselves very well. They form a very tight group of herd, where if a water buffalo is having a calf, there's usually one or two other water buffaloes, like a midwife assistants, looking after the newborn and helping the mother have its baby. They're very, very strong in helping each other that way and looking after each other in the herd.
Yeah.
No, they're a very interesting animal, and
Yeah.
very curious. Come on, girls.
Here they come.
But again, here we are at an interface. You can see the trees and the pasture and the riparian zone producing the salmon and the biohabitat. But the grassland and the ruminants fit into it very well. There's no problems of everything fitting together on the farm here.
Was that sort of by design choice? Like, the way the pastures are situated around riparian zones, or was that just kind of the way the land?
It's kind of the way the land was when we came here. These water flowed from the highland areas around through the meadows, and so we just kind of left the waterways where they are and deepened them a little bit to drain the grasslands. And we left the trees along the edges of the waterways, and the salmon just stayed where they had lived for centuries. And instead of having the elk here today and the deer, we have the water buffalo. So it's more of a change of species of ruminant that's more adaptive to human beings than having the wild elk here. Hi, girls. Hi, Gala. Come on, girl. There you go. Come on, girls. There we go. Come say hi. Not a girl. In terms of the winter weather, because they are used to working and they've evolved for working in Asian wetlands, they actually could stay out here all winter long if it wasn't too cold and snowy. Their feet can walk in the weather, wet soil, and don't get what normal cattle get, like foot rot or foot diseases. So they're much more adaptable for walking in wet soils. But they have a larger skin surface, a looser skin, things like that that allow them to cool themselves down more in the summertime as well. So in lots of ways they're evolved for what might happen if we got warmer climates here on Vancouver Island. These animals would probably do a lot better here than conventional Holstein milking cattle that are the norm in British Columbia. So in each one of these grazing paddocks, besides the salad bar, you'll notice there's a water tank over in the corner, and often we might put a bit of mineral or salt as well. But along the edges of these trees and that, we find that they don't eat much salt or mineral. They pick and choose the herbs and stuff, and you can see how all the limbs and the trees have been mowed down by the cattle. So they select, they want a little bit of astringent or something, they'll eat the tips off the fir tree or They'll eat the tips of the alder leaves or things like that. And so we kind of have nature's apothecary as they graze the grasslands as well. So part of the farm area of operations, besides the dairy and the beef and the grazing and the grasslands, is the concern that a lot of our customers have of ruminants producing methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas which is many more times damaging than CO2. So a lot of people think that ruminants and methane are damaging to the planet's ecosystem and health and the climate change. So there's a lot of discussion on the area of methane and ruminants and how it all fits together. But there's a couple of things that we thought would be very interesting to look at from our perspective. A grassland like this, we have indications that it's sequestering about 10 tons of carbon per acre per year through this process of ruminants and natural systems. So methane has always been produced by ruminants. Methane goes into the atmosphere and it reacts with sunlight and produces a hydroxyl ion which forms in the atmosphere gases and makes rain. So methane actually breaks down naturally and comes back to the surface in the water cycle. But perhaps there are ways that ruminants and methane could be managed. And so in the University of Davis in California, there's a scientist there that did some research feeding marine red algae, red seaweeds, to ruminants, dairy cattle, beef cattle. And in vitro, they found that it reduces methane production in ruminant cattle by 60 to 80% or more. Well, it turns out that one of our activities on this farm is that we harvest seaweed from the coast here in the Bain Sound of Vancouver Island. And it was an introduced species called Mozella japonica. I think it was introduced in the early 1900s by Japanese coal mine workers here in Cumberland. And they brought the Japanese oyster to the coast of British Columbia by collecting spat on a red seaweed in northern Japan, and that's this red algae, Mozella japonica. So when they spread it all over the ocean here, not only did the oysters take off, but so did the seaweed. And the Ministry of Agriculture has given us a license for the last 5 or 6 years to go down to a local beach in the wintertime when the storms drift up these huge mats of Mozella japonica. And they can be several feet thick for several kilometers long. And that seaweed was smothering the beach. All the natural beach life was covered in this huge rotting mass of seaweed producing methane from rotting on the beach. And so we thought, well, maybe we can do two things at once. We can take this rotting seaweed off the beach and reduce methane production from that. And since it's a red algae, if we fed it to these water buffalo or our dairy cattle or our beef cattle, it might produce the same effect as the scientists found in California. So for the last couple of years, we've been doing a test of feeding a few ounces a day of this dried seaweed to our beef cattle and water buffalo in cooperation and with the Thompson Rivers University and Professor John Church and scientists, PhD scientists here on the farm, and we've been working with North Island College and a few other local scientists as well. We've been testing the seaweed, first of all, to see if it has an effect on methane production, whether it will reduce it or not. And we've also been testing to see if it influences the organic acid content in the meat or milk. One of the benefits of grass-fed milk from buffalo or beef animals is things like conjugated linoleic acids, omega-3, omega-6 organic acids, and in certain ratios and amounts, according to research scientists, those are very beneficial to human health if they're consumed in the right ratio and amounts. So we're testing the meat and the milk to see what the effect is on these conjugated linoleic acids, the omega-3, the omega-6 ratio. And the research is just coming, the first research is just coming to an end this fall. And we don't really have any results one way or the other, but we certainly notice the animals love to eat it. For them, it's like eating candy. In the wintertime, if it's in the feed bunk, they'll nose around in the silage and eat it first. And when we put it out in a trough in the field, they'll come up and eat seaweed all the time. And this actually, ruminants eating seaweed has occurred for millions of years. Wild ruminants would come down to the beach at low tide and eat the seaweed. A lot of cultures in Prince Edward Island and Ireland and France, the animals have ate seaweed for decades and millennia. We also use the seaweed in our composting, and it really is a good food for feeding the fungal life in the compost and the soils. So we think there's a lot of benefits from taking this invasive species off the beaches and stop it from producing methane, enhancing the soil biology, enhancing the quality of meat, and perhaps reducing the methane that ruminants are producing on the planet. The other interesting thing, one of the local professors at North Island College has said that one of the things that's happening in the Salish Sea and here locally in Bain Sound is the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is being absorbed by the ocean, and it's acidifying the ocean. And so a lot of our shellfish, oysters, clams, things like that, the baby growing part of their life cycle is not growing as well as Bain Sound is getting more and more acidic. And there was a scallop farm here that went out of business because the scallops wouldn't grow in Bain Sound. The pH had dropped in the ocean. Well, she tells us that this Mizella japonica, this seaweed, growing in the ocean, will absorb 6 times more CO2 out of the ocean water than plants on land will. So there's a possibility that if we wanted to, people could start farming this Mizella japonica on ropes. It could absorb a lot of carbon out of the ocean water. pH acidification could be perhaps lessened. The ocean could improve, and perhaps it'll come to the grasslands and the ruminants will eat it, and there could be less methane produced and the atmosphere would benefit. So we don't know. It's still in the beginning stages. Possibly none of this would work out at all, but it's an interesting type of research that we've been carrying out here for the last year. You can just step over this wire. I don't think it's on, but
Okay.
I won't take the chance of touching it.
Thanks. So is this, I mean, will the cattle come here eventually too?
Yeah, so
Okay, I
this,
see what you mean. It's so much, the grass is so much taller.
this was grazed about 35, 40 days ago.
Okay.
And the cattle will come back here probably in about 15 to 20 days. And that gives you an idea what happens when you give the biological processes rest to recover from grazing. And you've got this beautiful grassland storing energy and absorbing rainwater, which we've had lots of in the last week or so. We've had about 4 inches of rain, but you can see it's all absorbed, and that's the benefit of having that microbiological sponge in the soil, the fungi and the air spaces absorbing the water, and the carbon content of these soils is getting over 20%, and that's probably close to 10 times the average carbon content of agricultural soils in North America, just because of the grasslands. And so you look over here to the stream where the salmon come back, that water is slowly feeding that stream. And so the neat part about Beaver Meadow Farms and the meadows is this is a lot of peat bog here that stores water in the wintertime for the grass meadows in the summertime. And when my grandfather came here and my father, a lot of these waterways had beaver dams in them. And the natural process were that the trout and the fry lived behind the beaver dams for a year in the summer. And so what we decided to do is to enhance that beaver dam process. There's still beavers and they still have dams here, but what we have put in place are some man-made beaver dams, about every 100 meters. And under the ground here are drain tiles, so that in the winter we can control the water table in the grasslands so they don't flood and damage the microbes and life in the soil. And it flows into the stream and goes down the ocean and overflows the beaver dams and the dams, which is part of the natural process. But in the summer, we raise those artificial beaver dams, and the water gets backed up in the drain tiles and feeds the soil, microbial roots, the grasslands, so we don't have to irrigate. And it's a way of saving energy, a way of enhancing the collection of energy and photosynthesis and keeping the grasslands healthy, while the fish are living in the stream behind the beaver dams and the man-made beaver dams. So by doing just a little bit of tweaking of a natural process, this is the most productive salmon stream on the east coast of Vancouver now, because of the farm and the stream working together and enhancing each other. Just a very simple natural process that we've developed and enhanced. And it's such an easy thing to do, and if farmers had some incentive to do it, I'm sure a lot more would do it. So if consumers look for salmon safe certification, then it will give them assurance that something like this is happening from where that food is coming from. So just an indication of sort of the holistic approach, how we look at everything together, how it fits together, how we try to enhance the energy capture by planting different kinds of grasses, how we get the soil life working, how we bring the ruminants together in cycles, how that fertility in the soil goes into the stream and produces more aquatic life. Most streams on Vancouver Island lack nutrients because they come from forest soils or urban waters. But here the water is clean and has a high level of fertility, that we have high bacterial, aquatic life, insect life. And then all the trees that shelter the water provide all the habitat for the birds and everything else that comes to these grasslands. And so the more and more this works together, the more productive the meadows and the streams become. And kind of here, the picture captures pretty well everything working together. All the trees are along similar streams like this, and then there's the grassland in between. And then we have the forest surrounding it. And I think pretty well that sums up this little tour of the farm today. And perhaps if there's questions, I'll try and answer them.